Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming and joining us this evening. My name is Timothy Stone Dancer Coleman. I am the founder and CEO of Coleman Global. We put out a podcast called The Colors of Sound. Our mission is to create a safe space for people to share their stories. We have interviewed people from all walks of life. We released our first episode just a couple of weeks ago. We're in season 2. I've had a chance to meet folks. It's amazing when you give someone a chance to speak about what's important to them and where they come from and to share their stories. You learn so much about what we all have in common, and that's our catchphrase, discover what we all have in common. Today, we have an amazing gentleman with us, Mr. Alcy Leyva, who wrote our book of the evening, The Silent, Subtle, Ever-Present Perils of Life. Alcy is an accomplished author who has multiple books that we're going to get into. He'll share a little bit about that with us throughout the evening. I was born and raised in Nebraska. I've been living in New York for 24 years, since the age of 19, but I've been in the Bronx for 24 years. I wish I was that young. And, this is home, right? And so I always am looking forward to sharing stories, especially about the Bronx, because I feel like everybody else is always trying to tell our story. And usually when you look at television, that story is depressing, and we don't really highlight enough of the genius and the potential and the power that we all have in the Bronx. I know we're sitting in this amazing store in Manhattan, but I'm still gonna rep the Bronx. I don't care where we go. We gonna pretend like we're uptown right now. I wanna say one quick thing about this location is that they also have vinyl records over here on the side. Sorry, I already had a chance to pick some favorites and put them away, but you should definitely check that. And it triggered for me why I also created this particular podcast, because my father used to be a gospel radio DJ for like 30 years. And I remember tagging along with him and dragging crates of vinyl records. So it was just kind of cool that this moment is kind of like a full life cycle moment. So let's get into it. The Silent, Subtle, Ever-Present Perils of Life is a book that's been released by Green Writers Press, a woman-owned, Vermont-based global publisher. The term locavore applies to their mission, which is to publish books, ebooks, and audiobooks that will spread a message of hope and renewal as they strive to build awareness about the global climate catastrophe. In The Silent, Subtle, Ever-Present Perils of Life, we meet Maji, a 16-year-old African-American teenager from the Bronx who, inspired by Moby Dick and overwhelmed by issues of racism, mental health, and complex family dynamics, sets sail on the Hudson in search of a miracle and experiences a coming-of-age journey that blends own voice insight, social commentary, elements of magical realism. Alcy Leyva is a Bronx-born, multi-genre writer whose first 2 books in the Shades of Hell series, And Then There Were Crows, and Then There Were Dragons, were published by Black Spot Books. Alcy is currently working on his PhD in creative writing for the University of Bingham, where he lives and works. While he lives and works, I'm like, how'd you pick that up? While he lives and works in New York. Please, can we give a round of applause for our guest, Alcy Leyva?
Thank you.
So
I'm going to try not to have my white woman voice on the podcast. Thank you for having me. I've never been on a podcast, so I'm going to try to be real. So, how you doing?
Yes. Come on, Bronx.
How you doing?
Yeah. This is why they keep writing our story in a different way.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So tell us a little bit about your background. Like, where are you from? What area of the Bronx are you from? Where you grew up? And what does the Bronx mean to you?
Sure. So I was born in the South Bronx, and that's like the East Tremont area. I was born and raised there, like Fordham Road, all the way down to the Bronx Zoo. That's like my area. That's where all my memories are. And so, I grew up walking through those streets, and I went through school there. I went to Catholic school in Fordham Road. I went to Catholic school. I went to a lot of Catholic school. Catholic school in Cardinal Hayes High School. So it's one of those things that I had the opportunity to live in, and then eventually, when I grew up, I had the opportunity to teach there. So that's my journey, with many more little wrinkles in there. This is my journey.
We all have those
wrinkles.
Okay. So We know that you're a writer. Obviously, we're here to celebrate the release of your book. Which book? What number is this? How many books have you released?
So I've released 2 books out of a series. So it was called the Hell series, and the third book is still in limbo, literally. That I'm still trying to put out and publish. I've been part of 2 other anthologies, collective stories, and then this is my first young adult fiction book. So this is technically my 3rd book by myself, but it's like my 5th book out to publish. Yeah.
And how did you land on being a writer? Like, sometimes we arrive in places in life and it's because we've done like all these other things. And then all of a sudden, something ignites inside of us and we get on a path of purpose, So did you always write even when you were younger, or is this something that sparked out of something else that you were doing?
I wrote quite a bit. It was all weird and offensive. And it's just something that's innate, right? My father passed away just over a year ago. And one of the things that I found was he was like, the storyteller himself. So I think there is part of it in my blood to say that. But I've always been interested in stories. I think the subjects that I didn't fail at, I look at as stories. So history, I really love because I look at it as stories. Science as well, not math, and English. Like these are the subjects that I really connect myself to is like philosophy as well. I love, and religion I love as well. Like studying that, I see it as stories.
Yeah.
Because in the end, we have this discussion of like, what's the role of the artist? The painter, the poet, the writer. And usually we have the historians and the scientists that build things, but the artists are the ones that kind of tell you the emotional background of it. So I'm always fascinated by just storytelling in all kind of like backgrounds and disciplines. Yeah.
Right. Because it kind of overlaps with like, does life imitate art or does art imitate life? Right? Do you have an answer?
I'm not here for that deep conversation. I just worked a full day of school. I'm not here for existentialism.
All right, an easier question. What are some of your hobbies?
Well, my hobbies include softball. So I play a lot of softball. And teaching. And thinking about teaching. And thinking about writing. I think everything goes together, right? My hobbies, and if you want to talk like activities that I love to do, I love hanging out with my sons. I love hanging out with my family. But yeah, it's all, unfortunately, even when I'm doing those, I'm writing, right? So like sometimes my wife is driving next to me and I'm just driving on the highway and it's all dark. And I'm like, email me something.
Yeah.
A dog speaks to its owner with a loaded gun. Write that down, email that to me. And then like 10 months later, I look at my email like, what the hell is this? A dog? So even in my hobbies, I'm still writing. It's still part of my process because a lot of the writing that I do, like my original genre is speculative fiction. So all of us know what speculative fiction is. Absolutely not.
Nope.
So speculative fiction is fantasy that specifically takes place in city dwellings, right? So it's like taking a city and filling it with magic, with dragons, with demons. And the reason why I love it is because New York City is just my city that I love and adore. So I love telling its stories, but I love telling it through lenses and stuff like that. So I can't escape that. So whenever I'm on the train or I'm driving around, I'm always thinking of things people say to each other or weird things that happen or what does that smell? So it's part of my, I'm always kind of writing. Doesn't stop.
I have that, what is that smell? That I spent several years on the 41 bus.
Yeah.
And
that is.
They laugh at me because I used to work for the Department of Education, and on my way home every day, I would put my headphones on and I would just listen to the sounds of the Amazon, just so I could calm back down from working in such a chaotic kind of situation. And then, you can't imagine what it's like to hear like waterfalls and parakeets and all these other types of things while you're looking at all these people on this insane bus ride. Yeah, the smells don't match.
No.
It's a nightmare. So you mentioned before, a little bit about family. How important is family to you?
Extremely. I think my connection to family. I mean, I'm always rooted in relationships, right? And when I first started writing, I started thinking about my relationships. So my relationships to my mother and my father, my brothers, and my sons, right? I'm always fascinated by that. The people who lift us up, the people who pick us up when we're down, and how that is not always the case.
Right.
Right. And I'm grateful to have an amazing family that supports me. My mom is here, sitting right there. So I'm going to highlight her right there. Fabulous hair. And I'm also going to give her this.
Oh, how beautiful. Flowers. That's nice. That's really cool.
For her support. And, you know, I was someone that really lucked out with an amazing family. So I'm respecting and understanding that time, man.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So are you a writer full-time? You mentioned that you teach. Like, what is, is this the side hustle till it becomes the main hustle? Like, how are you fitting, this being like the fifth piece that you've entered into the world, right? 3 books by yourself plus the other ones that you've been a part of. How are you?
4-year pregnancy. That was very bad.
This one?
Yes.
It took 4 years?
4 years.
Well, what sparked it? Like what?
So to answer your question, those 2 questions go together. I always approach everything from the writer's perspective, right? So even in my, group of, people that I work with, the other teachers, my background is specifically writing, not education. So I do love to teach, but I always look at it as a lens of like, what do authors do, right? How do they see the world and so on? And my background, and as I said, it's not education. I got my master's in fiction in 2016 from the New School, and I read Moby Dick then. Don't ever read it. It's a terrible book. And I'll explain why probably later.
One of your characters is okay.
Yes.
All right. We'll get to it.
We'll get to it. But I wrote 2 things then. I wrote the first sentence of this book. And then another thing, because I just chase as many cards as I can, I wrote another thing, which was Moby Dick from the perspective of the whale. Like I literally wrote a book about him. And I was just fascinated by it. Like it's just there all the time. So I always knew that I wanted to represent it. There's this study that talks about like how we're different learners. The way I learn something is I mimic it, right? So if I really love a writer, I try to write like that writer. I write down sentences, the way they construct their sentences. So for like a whole year, I was writing like Melville, which was awful because, again, don't read Moby Dick. It's really awful, but it's on purpose, right? There's a purpose to what Melville does in that book. But I like to mimic. And once I get into the mimicry, I understand and try to like get into the meat and bones of it. But that's always my approach is like learning and then putting down. But I only wrote the first sentence like 4 years ago, and then I put it down for a while. Yeah.
So what made you pick it back up? I mean, if you've done, you've gone in these different pathways. So it's 4 years, it's in a text next to, another text about a dog with a gun. Like what made you pull this back?
Yeah. I should have gone with the dog.
It's not too late. No.
It's the pandemic. I mean, I was locked away, and we were all locked away in our little boxes for so long. But the pandemic triggered so many things at the same time, right? While everyone was in their little boxes, we still had like this explosion of like Black Lives Matter and Me Too movement. And there was such a big push for social justice and civil rights and everything that was happening there, this new resurrection.
Yeah.
Because no one can turn away from their phones. That's the only way we can communicate.
Right.
So I was fascinated by it because when I first wrote that sentence in 2016, I saw Maji. So let me explain how I think about writing. I think writing is like, I think writers are cursed, right? Because we see kind of like a door. And sometimes that door is wide open and you can look right through that door and you can see everything. You can see the trees, you can see the water, you can feel the air, but sometimes that door is shut. and you can only look through a little peephole, and that's all you can see. And you can't control when the door is open and when it's closed. In 2016, the door was closed, but I can see through the peephole Maji, right? I can see him on the raft. I can see him listening to music. I didn't know why he was on the raft. I didn't know what music he was listening to. I don't know what put him out there. So I just put it off to the side. And then in the pandemic, when I sat down to start writing, I saw everything. That door was open. And this is probably, like, when I say it took me 4 years to write, that's a lot. That's pretty far, right? 6 years away from when I first wrote that sentence. But it only took me about 4 months to write, like cover to cover.
Do you feel like that's because you were so focused and intent in that specific wave of creation that that was its time to be born?
Yeah, and I had already experienced things. So this book, while it is, YA fiction, I like to think of it in two parts. For young adults, this is definitely a book that they can pick up and understand and relate to and see. But for adults, I wrote it as myth, and your question about like, where are you from the Bronx? One of the things that I learned very early was that other people were telling our stories.
Right.
Yeah. And so this is me kind of reclaiming it, because I knew that no one who here has read Moby Dick? Don't lie. Thank you. We don't have to lie to ourselves. We don't have to lie. And I can tell you that's not a thing that Bronx students read, specifically because, one, it's a very big old book, but two, it seems outside of us. It's about a white guy that goes out to the ocean.
And bugs out with a whale.
And to us, that's not part of our world, so we separate it. But the lesson in there is ours,
Right.
The lesson of like obsession and, man versus nature and questioning existence and questioning God. I didn't set out to like rewrite what Melville did. What I did was I extracted all the themes that he saw and I put it in this book. And that's why when I saw Maji on the boat, I knew exactly what it was.
Right.
Because Maji is like an amalgamation of everything I've seen teaching. If you read a story and you're like, wow, that's a lot of detail, that's because it happened. Maji is many students that I've read, that I've had in my classes. And so that's how I was able to see him, because I've seen him in front of me, And so the structure of the book is very much like a fable for adults, a myth for adults. It's separated into 3 different sections. But if you look at the construct, right, I built a fictional Bronx called Park South. But if you look at the construct, it's Bronx Park South. It's where I grew up, right? For the buildings are still where they are. The people are still where they are.
But is that intentional? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, do you sometimes like get in the creative zone and you're going for it, and then when you go back to read it, you realize, oh my God, I've experienced some of these same things. Like, how conscious are you inside of the wave of creation?
Yeah, so there's 2 ways to go about it. There's one way where you can step back and be like, well, I'm just going to like create a world from my imagination. But some of the greatest writers don't need that. Marquez, who wrote 1,000 Years of Solitude, rewrote his country's history, right? And it was just, it's a foundation. And so that's what I wanted to do. I did it intentionally to be like, these stories still exist. Like, these themes still exist in the Bronx, and we shouldn't get rid of it, And of course, it seems like it's not entirely, what Melville was intending, but it definitely has all of the themes that he was like touching on. And I see it in today's youth, right? So a lot of the things with, it seems weird, but why do I exist? 16-year-olds in the Bronx ask themselves that question. Who do I look up to? Who do I mirror? Who's my mirror? And especially with, kids who are, Hispanic and Black, it's impossible to see themselves in Shakespeare. It's impossible to see themselves in places in literature. And that's why when I teach, I'm like, I'm not teaching you dead white men. We're going to go, we're going to really take the expanse of literature, because there's more stories than just the classics that are out there.
That's absolutely true. So how important is it to you that kids have a representation of themselves even in the classroom, right? Like even the person introducing a story to these students can shade that story based off of their own lens.
Yeah.
Right? So what are your thoughts about students being able to see a representation of themselves in these types of positions?
It's highly important. I mean, I'm an English teacher, and it's not rare, but it's not often that you see a male Hispanic English teacher.
Right.
And so I've had many students that are just like, so how do I connect to you? Because I want to connect with you. Like, they see it, and I see it in them too. I see myself working on that, and their parents do too. I mean, I've had parents that come up to me, and then, I teach currently at the United Nations International School, where there's just a lot of mix of students. But even in my classes, there are not many students of color, right? Because it's a large, broad band there. But I do have students that their parents will come in and be like, as soon as they see me, they're like, I'm so glad. I've had one parent last year who was like, I'm so glad that you're teaching my son, because you know what kinky hair looks like.
Right.
Right. And she's like, don't be afraid to smack him. I'm not getting anyone from, Uruguay or Europe telling me that I can smack their child.
Right.
But it's just like that community, because it's even for parents of color that are raising kids such as Maji, that have the same fears, because Maji's father in this book, Eli, is like extremely afraid, right? And there's fear that goes around of what does it mean to be surviving in this city. So even for parents, it's actually extremely important to have representation in classroom.
Well, I mean, and what is the reality for so many students of surviving versus living?
Yeah.
Right? Like, I feel that's a truth that is universal around the world, but specifically in the Bronx, since we were talking about it, a lot of these kids don't recognize, like, there's such a differentiation. Like, we become so programmed of struggling and surviving that when they see someone on television that's like 7 houses and multiple cars and traveling around the world whenever they feel like that's just like a foreign character to them, right? And so we need folks who can actually bring that kind of stuff home to them and show them the pathway to it. So before we get into reading a passage from the book, I want to ask you, how do you define purpose? And do you feel like as a writer, you're living your purpose, or is that just a piece of it?
More existential questions, bro.
I mean, but
I love it. No, I love it. I love it. Purpose. I mean, I'm someone that, I failed at college so badly. And it was specifically because I was seeking a purpose that wasn't mine. I was a business marketing major. I was a business management major. Don't even ask me what business management does. It just accrues debt. That's what I probably did. But once I locked into being an English teacher, that was my purpose. And I still remember, in high school, in my junior year, I had a teacher in Cardinal Hayes, Mr. Slater, who was like, you scored so high in the Regents, you should be an English teacher. And I was just like, get out of my face. Don't insult me like that, be a teacher. But the thing is, I love sharing information with people. I love sharing stories with people. So I'm absolutely in my purpose. I feel like it's never 100%. I feel like you're slowly striving to that singularity, that smallest point, the purest form. And I think I'm getting there. Like I said, and I've said this before, I think this book is my favorite book. It is my favorite book that I've written. And it's only because it's getting closer to what I want to do. I love my other books. I really do.
That's powerful. That's dope.
Yeah, but it's inching towards that singularity, purity.
I love that answer. So let's get into it. Give us some of these words, brother.
Sure. So I'm going to read something because I've totally planned this. Okay. So I'm going to read the last part of the prologue. Maji has gotten out into the water and he sees this apparition in the water, which is like of a screaming woman. I have a horror background. I don't know if you know that. So like things that come up that are like, ooh, that imagery is kind of spooky. It's on purpose. But and again, I actually talk about later on in the book where that image comes from. And yeah, this book does have to do with mental health as well, because Maji it deals with anxiety and deals with like, you know, these things that he can't necessarily like speak of, because in communities of color, it's hard to talk about mental health.
That's right.
So he sees this image, but at the same time, he's going to see his first sunrise. So I'm just going to read a little bit about this. But then his mind bends, skipping back across his memory to the sound of splashing water. Out in the darkness, he sees the image of a pregnant woman holding her hands to her chest. There's nothing around her, but Maji can feel his terror as if it's strangling him. There's another ghostly image just a few feet in front of her. A gun, a white hand. She opens her mouth to yell. Before the gun fires, Maji feels the air change and turns to face the horizon. The water grows quiet. The sky appears to bruise. This is it, Maji tells himself. It is here already, the miracle. A red eye creeps out of the water in the distance and swells. Its vast light changes the entire sky. No, it's not an eye, but Maji knows it is beautiful. He doesn't blink. Instead, he stands to his feet and watches, mouth open. The clouds bend towards the sun as the new day is born. Maji looks over to where the screaming woman had appeared, but she's escaped with the darkness. Pulling his earbuds from his pocket, Maji plugs himself into his phone and slips them in. He plays the first song on the playlist. As if fate, the first song that plays is Frank Ocean. Maybe it's fate, but he sings along, and then it gets to the part where Frank sings, and the water is exactly what I wanted it to be. It's everything I thought it would be, but this neighborhood is getting trippier every day. This neighborhood is going apeshit crazy. Maji laughs out loud and catches himself when he realizes that he's been crying this entire time. He has never known the world to be so warm and beautiful. And in this new life revealing itself to him, he finds himself ready to find his miracle. Thank you. So that is a major component too. I compose an entire playlist. So I usually make playlists, like music playlists for all the books that I write. But this is the first time I actually get to make one for a character. So the same music that he listens to on the boat is the same music that you can listen to. Because I thought about what, we always ask that question, what are the 10 songs that you have to take to a remote island that you can only take for yourself, And so I made the playlist based on that. Like Maji he made a playlist that he knows he's going to lose reception, but he gets to download these only 12 songs and listen to it on his journey. So that's where they're from.
Were these songs playing in your head as you were writing it, or was it something that you went back into the story and inserted them? Like, were you feeling
as I was writing it? Yeah, as I was writing it. And there's there's another character that comes in that sort of introduces other songs and challenges Maji's songs and stuff like that. But it's definitely one that just, it carries me through. And that's why, like, the first song is Frank Ocean, which is the prologue. But the last song is also Frank Ocean, which is like leaving. No spoilers, but leaving. So it's definitely the first time that I've created just a playlist for one specific character.
That's really cool. Now, talk to us about the cover. This is so beautiful. Like, how did this come about?
Yeah.
And is this actually what you had in mind? Like, as you envisioned him in this raft, in the water, like, what were the images that you had, and how close is this?
So the beautiful people at Green Writers Press, they, when we were like getting going and getting this book done, were trying to figure out, okay, who would you like, to draw up your cover? And I was just like, well, I don't know. And the first thing that was thrown out by Dee Dee, who is, you just mentioned her, she's the figurehead of Green Writers. She's just like, well, what about Kehinde Wiley? And I was just like, I teach this man's art in my class. Like, he does a lot of portrait, and his most famous work is the self-portrait, the portrait of Obama that's up in the White House. So that was like 2 weeks after he released that. And they were like, yeah, how about Kehinde? And I was just like, sure. Go ahead.
Try it out.
Try it out.
Right.
And then like a week later, they were like, Kehinde loves the idea of the book. You got the painting.
That's nice.
And they sent me this painting. And now this painting is amazing. And if you want to look at the entirety of the painting, this is one whole painting this way.
On the front and on the back.
On the front and the back. And this one is actually hanging up in a museum in Washington. Mm-hmm. And when I first saw it, I was just like gobsmacked. Yeah. Right. And again, I do thinking of that, what I was telling you about the door, I feel like artists sometimes see the same thing from different perspectives. Mm-hmm. So when I saw that, I saw Maji. And I mean, even in the background, this entire painting is specifically about boys fishing, surviving off the ocean. And there's like these ghostly things in the background.
I was going to say, it's like a haunting little scene, like that's kind of faded out.
Yeah, but at the same time, like when I saw this, I also saw like a city in the background, like sailing away from New York City. And I was just like, holy crap, you know? So I'm like super grateful to be able to say like, this is, you know, this has his blessing as like, no, this is a painting that he created, but he wants to attach it to the work that I have. And I think that's it. You know, I think sometimes it takes several artists together to put something together. Mm-hmm. And I literally couldn't have done it. This has been my wallpaper of my phone for the last 2 years because it just keeps reminding me of Maji. I see it and I think of him. So Kehinde made his own Maji and I made my own Maji. We were seeing the same kid.
That's dope. Yeah, I have the logo of the Colors of Sound podcast. So like I stared at it forever and I changed it 1,000 times and I was happy with it. I thought initially I put it on cups, I put it on all these things. And I looked at the original one day and I was like, I don't like it, you know, and I had to come back and like redo it. So just like I think in writing, in any type of artistry, you know, we have to get the idea out. Like I think that's one of the big things that I like to talk to the community about, in that the biggest challenge is just taking step one.
Yeah.
Right? And it doesn't mean that it has to be perfect. It doesn't mean that you have to be in love with that idea or be so attached to it that you can't see the possibility of it changing or growing or becoming something bigger than your original idea. But I think
in writing, we call that kill your darlings. Yeah. So you have something that is your darling project that you don't want to. Sometimes got to kill it, but make it better.
Right.
You know, like it's something that I see and I've grown, but that when you grow, it should be growing with you. So
that's dope. So that's funny because it triggers me to say, how do you know when you're done? Like, are you ever, like, how do you know when you've typed that final chapter? Like, and you hit the thing and you sit back and you're like, hello, millionaire. You know, like what, like, how do you know when you get to that point?
I'll let you know when I get there. Someone told me this a long time ago. I think this is from my master program. I don't know who said it. So if someone remembers it, I evoke your name, summon you. But I think what I learned back then, it was like great art is never finished. It's only abandoned, right? So it's like,
oh my God.
It becomes a vessel for someone else, right? So someone such as, you know, Da Vinci will paint something and it won't be 100% what he wants to say maybe, but it'll inspire the next person to finish that story. And then we pass it on and pass it on. So the idea of like finishing is impossible for me personally. I just give it to my editor and I'm like, I don't want to see it. 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 But I can always go back and make it better because I'm always seeing something new. Mm-hmm. It just takes that time to step away. And that's when you have a team, right? That's why you have editors and that's why you have people that'll talk you off that ledge and be like, stop writing, stop editing. But the people at Green Writers Press have been just amazing with, you know,
your process.
Is it a period or a comma? Is it a period or a comma?
Right. So one day Madonna's going to write a third verse to Like a Virgin. I'm sorry. I'm just... If I'm not existential, I can't even say it. Then I got to be like me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
I get it.
Right, so what comes next, right? You say that the baby of this, right, was birthed. The seed of this was birthed, you know, years back, and then you've done other things and released other things, and then now you've come back to this and you've put this out into the world. And it is an amazing book. I can't, like, once I started reading it, I was like, yeah. So what comes next? Are you already working on your next project? I hear what you said before about like you're always writing and things are always inspiring you, but like how inspired are you into an actual process?
I chased, like I said, I chased too many cars. So I do have like a collection of short stories that I'm working on that I've been working on slowly. And this is also coming from the pandemic, but this is more like, how do we try to reconnect after being disconnected for so long? So it's just short stories based on that. That's for adults,
Right.
for that one for sure. But then I'm also in this PhD program, and the outcome of that will be a book as well. So that is once again like rooting itself in Bronx history. So I'm learning a lot about Bronx history, learning more about every single element of the Bronx, all the way from the 1960s all the way till now, to make another book, not of Maji, but another exploration of the Bronx. So that's going to be my next. I feel like my short stories is going to be my fun book, where I get to curse and rant and kill as much as I want, but because you need that sort of exorcism every single time. But at the end of this, I'll definitely be publishing something that is once again rooted in the Bronx. Because like I said, I really loved writing everything I did, but I think this is my groove. And so I want to make the next book better and see where I can go with it.
That's beautiful. Do you guys have any questions for Alcy? I mean, I know I'm kind of hogging the question moment. So does anybody else have anything that they are interested in, whether it's about the book or his background, where he is in life? They've been so attentive, right? But when you pop that question back on him, it's like, I don't see you, you don't see me. Yeah.
Welcome to being a teacher.
So, all right, we're gonna give. Oh, yes, ma'am.
So I know you talked about a little bit of your approach towards writing, and it almost sounds like a method actor, right? Like you'll kind of mimic their style for a little bit. At what point do you say like, okay, I've done enough mimicking, and like, how do I take pieces of this and create my own narrative and put it in my own voice? Like, what does that transition moment look like? Do you have a light bulb moment, or is it just kind of one day you're sitting there and you're like, all right, I think it's time for my voice to be
Yeah.
there.
So the transition time is it varies. I stayed with Melville for so long, but then my other books, which are the Shades of Hell series, that's me mimicking Dante's Inferno, right? So that was very easy because I love Dante's Inferno and I love Paradise. I know what my niche is. I know what my voice is, and it's always sarcastic and temperamental, and
Looking at his family's face, I think they can confirm. Yeah,
confirm. So that will never change, right? So I loved the concept of Moby Dick, but I wanted to see what would happen if I turned it over. So my voice is, while it's Melville's pattern of words, and again, Melville will write 2.5 pages with only semicolons and no periods. So good luck reading that if you want to. But on the other end, but I mimic that, but in focusing on the things that I wanted to focus on. I always thinking about identity and mental health and connections and reconnections and disconnections. So it's always in the pattern or the structure of the author, but it's always with the things I care about. And then eventually that when I pull out, that's when I start storyboarding, right? So when I storyboard is like, I take out these index cards and I storyboard the entire story out. And then I look at where the balance is. So am I following the pattern? Do I have enough of my voice in every single chapter? It's color coded, it's nuts. And then just last year I created a new template for me to write, which is color coding all the words that have similarities and then removing all the words and then looking what patterns of colors show up. I created that last year. I started that last year. And for me, that's the balance. So a Melville word will come up blue, but I need to make sure my sarcasm comes out green beside it. I hope that helps.
Yes, sir. In the back and then here.
So you teach high school.
Yeah. Students of that age. Have you ever had any of your students Yes, unfortunately. Like they'll come out and they're like slowly sneaking the book out. Like I'm like, you're still getting a C. I don't know why. Thank you for your patronage.
Rude.
No, I mean they do. What's funny is like when I first started working at Eunice, that was the first time I like really published a book, and students were like excited. Like right now in October, we have students creating. This is a freshman. Writing their own stories. So then I teach them all about, the old story of an hour and, interlopers and telltale heart and all that. But then I show them my writing process. They love that. And they always ask like, Mr. Leyva, are we going to ever study one of your stories? And I'm like, no. No. But they're always interested. They always ask. And I always tell them, if you want to read a story, read this one, not the other one, because I dropped the F-bomb, I think 13 words in and throughout the book. But this is definitely geared towards them, and I think they're like more excited to hear about that. And just to know that whenever I say, this is what the writer's thinking about, they're like, how do you know? I get that question. I'm like, I know. So yeah, they're excited always, and they're very like supportive, and I think they like to know that their teachers are cool and they have a life. I had a whole class like celebrate when I had my PhD, when I got my acceptance to my PhD. They were so excited, but it's because students want to know that you're a human being and you have wants and needs.
Well, and that you have a quest to continue to learn.
Yeah, and I mean, let's be real. There are teachers that don't exude that. They're like, I've peaked.
That's absolutely
I have tenure.
True.
Here's your seat. Deal with it. But me, they can tell that I'm passionate about literature because I do it. I don't just profess how great it is. I also practice it. So, yeah.
That's great. And sir, you had a question, and then we'll come back.
Yeah.
You answered the first question, which was, would you ever teach your book in class? Which you said no.
Never.
So my second question is, how would you want somebody to teach your book? As a character study?
Carefully.
Oh my God, that's a great question.
In comparison to Moby Dick, how would you want your book taught in class?
I mean, it's interesting because there's a couple of writers. It's actually becoming more and more popular to do this. Over the last 6 years, we've had what's called what we call reclamation history, where a lot of female authors are now rewriting myth to include the woman side of the story. So Circe, Song of Achilles, and so on. Like they're specifically rewriting the myths that were always male-centered. And in the last 2 years, you've had more Hispanic writers coming up and being like, I can tell a better Great Gatsby than you think, right? So if you read something like Bodega Dreams, which came out in 2012, but that's an example of an author that's like, no, we have a better Great Gatsby, and it's told straight from the Bronx, and it's told straight with these characters. The author I got to meet way back then, and he said that. He was just like, they've been taking our stories for forever. We got to tell that story.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, I think it's always great to show the progress of stories. I do that all the time, and show how stories change, but then how are they relatable to your audience? Yeah.
That's great. And sir, you had a question as well?
That's a great question, by the way. Not that anyone didn't have a great question. I'm just saying that's an interesting question, I should really say. I like subversion. So I love giving you what we call an archetype of a character. And you're like, oh, that's going to be the sassy gay man that she's, and we have that sort of archetype that we expect. And then I love turning that over. And to subvert the audience expectations is what I always want to do. I always want them to be like, okay, so it's obviously an evil little goat creature, but then it turns out to be her roommate, and he's okay. He's all right. He's a good dude, right? For me, writing characters is the most fun because of dialogue, right? So I love characters that if you see them, you can see them like physically, but when they speak, it's like something familiar. And that's why I do all of my writing on the train, right? So people freak out when I say it. I wrote all my books on my phone because I write primarily on the train. I love listening to people talk, argue, talk about buying chocolate for their, not for their basketball team, but to keep them off the streets, blah, blah, blah. And so I love picking up on dialogue. So my stories are always dialogue heavy. Like I love characters, and then I love subverting what you think they're gonna say. And so the smarty pants, the clever dude that's there, he'll say something and I want you to pick up on it, and then I'll reveal it later. So I love creating characters, but I love the way they speak. Sometimes I'm just in the bath and I'm just practicing pacing, speaking to myself, which sounds crazy probably, and probably I am. But I love talking and hearing voices.
I talk a lot to myself, and I do hear voices, but I haven't written a book about it. But I'm just, tidbits, just tidbits. Keep going. This is your moment, bro.
All of a sudden we're in therapy session. But yeah, I love that. And some of my favorite books are character driven and dialogue driven. So yeah, I try to emulate that sort of style.
Yes, sir?
So we're seeing like Moby Dick and Dante's Inferno as books that you're kind of reading stories of. Are there any other future stories that you want to claim?
I do want, well, I only wrote 2 books of the Shades of Hell. I still have a 3rd book that I really want to put out. And that's specifically, Paradiso, which is the end of Dante's Inferno. So I'd love to keep going back to Milton. I'm wondering about that now. I have a Cuban writer that I'm studying now for my PhD who basically retold the Haitian Revolution, but through fiction, through magic. And I'm reading his stuff, and it's like brutal. I don't even think I can get there, right? I don't think I can be that forward and beautiful with his language. His name is Alejo, and he's the author that coined the phrase magical realism. He's the first author to ever say the word magical realism. And that from there, we have the Marqueses and the Borges and all the other authors that came from magical realism. But it's an amazing book. So I don't have one specifically in mind, and I don't know if I'll catch on to one, but maybe.
Sign me up for when you do the new version of Charlotte's Web.
Ooh.
I love that book. Okay, come on.
So I'm also a Bronx girl. I'm a Bronx native.
Mm.
And so it excites me when, we see historically misrepresented or underrepresented characters be the protagonists.
Mm.
And to your point, tell their own story. And I know you talk about how your students inspire so much of like these moments and parts of the character. But then you just twist it on its head. I guess my question is more of like, what are the aspects of your students that you find so moving and powerful that you want to make sure is highlighted in your character that stays true to the Bronx before, you do that flip? Or are there any pieces of those characteristics that you're really proud of that you're like, I don't want that to flip. That's something that I want to be prevalent throughout the book in this character.
Yeah, I mean, in specifically Maji, I had a lot of Majis. I've taught a lot of Majis. Maji is a character, and I see this in a lot of my students that remind me of his character. He just wants to be good. He just wants literally to be good. He wants to be safe. He wants to have friends. He wants to have family. He just wants to be good. But the world doesn't give him a clear way to be good. No one's telling him, these are the steps that you do to feel safe. These are the steps that you do to have a secure family. These are the steps you do to keep your mental health. Mm-hmm. And so he listens to everything. He listens to music, and they tell him something. That he has a YouTuber that he likes to follow. He looks at him and he wants to idolize that life. Like, that's so many of our students of color who they don't have it because it's not in their books. It's not in their schools, because schools are like, identity, no, SAT. That's what you got to worry about right now. And it's not in their media, right? Media is telling them, hey, this person said something wrong. Let's dogpile them, right? Let's say something bad about someone online.
This is that whole cancel culture,
That
and then
cancel
everybody
culture.
dives in, and it's
Yeah.
like people get so much joy out of just darkness.
Yeah, and it part of it again especially during the pandemic, it was very easy to be that way, and I worried. Maji has this crisis because everything is falling off, right? The protests in New York City, the images that he consistently sees, and honestly, there are people that fail him, and those are the people I keep the same. There are people who, and not like intentionally either, not giving much away, but Maji idolizes his teacher. And in many ways, his teacher is supportive, and it's like that male figure. But he's not perfect, He's not perfect either. And so, without being able to tell Maji that I'm not perfect, how are you going to tell this boy that he's going to be safe? So I do like the idea of all these, these characters, but I love keeping them the same. There's something rich about it, and truthful. Because there are times where, as a teacher, I feel like I failed students. I should have been extra, or I should have pulled back. That's part of it. Yeah.
All right. So we've enjoyed this conversation. You are unbelievably talented,
Thank you.
sarcastic and twisted,
Thank you.
and awesome. And I think a great representation of the Bronx. Can we give a round of applause to Mr. Alcy Leyva? Thank you for joining us on this podcast for the Colors of Sound. Hello to everybody out there watching on the live stream. We really appreciate you joining in and staying with us throughout our event. Alcy, as one final question to anyone who is interested at the very beginning stages, they want to be a writer, maybe a young person who, you say that there are people in Maji's life that have failed him, and, maybe there are people listening or watching who need, I don't know, whether it's an encouraging word or just a starting point, some way to take step one. What is that advice? What would you say to someone looking to get into it?
I point directly to the book, and I say Maji felt like he didn't have those supports, and he built his raft and he set out. And so that's my advice. Like, build your raft and set out, because it's out there, right? And what Maji finds out in the ocean, which is, of course, this big, broad space that can take his life as much as give to his life, he still sets out for it, And that's my advice. Build your boat and go out. And for those people that love you and support you, they will, they'll find you, and you'll find your way back. So
that's beautiful. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
A round of applause for Timothy Coleman here for hosting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I said yes to coming to do this, and initially, when he said, can we do a live stream? I was like, sure, that'll be so dope for my podcast, and I can find a new audience. And then the very next day, I was at home on the couch in a full sweat, oh my God, I don't know how to press all these buttons. What am I supposed to be doing? So thank you, Mimi, for handling the live stream. We appreciate it. You took all the stress off of me. Thank you so much for that. Thank you to Mom, Priscilla Ortiz, for coming and supporting, and to Alcy's older brother, Paul, for coming out and supporting.
With his cane. With his cane.
And to each and every last one of you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Signing books.